The story opens with a soft rumble, almost like distant thunder. But it isn't weather. It's a sound that, in the early years of World War II, made Allied sailors shiver. A sound naval crews would never forget. It was the deep, slow hum of a German Fw-200 Condor sweeping across the Atlantic, hunting, tracking, and sending entire convoys to the bottom of the sea. Today we're going back to the moment American mechanics got their hands on a captured Condor for the very first time, and realized something that none of them expected. This aircraft shouldn't have been able to fly that far, but it did, and what they found inside shocked them even more. The story begins on a cold, windy morning in 1942 at a secret Allied airfield in the British Isles. A heavy fog rolled over the runway, the kind of fog where shapes bend and shift like ghosts. A small group of American mechanics, engineers, and intelligence officers stood waiting. They had been told almost nothing, only that a special delivery was being brought in, something the Allied command wanted studied immediately. One mechanic, Staff Sergeant Tom Bradley, rubbed his hands together for warmth and muttered, "Can't be another busted Spitfire. They wouldn't drag us out for that." His friend, Corporal Eddie Harper, chuckled under his breath. "Maybe it's a German plane. A real one, not one with holes in it." Tom didn't laugh. He just stared into the fog, waiting. Then the sound came, a deep, uneven rumble as if an old freight train was rolling through the sky. The fog shifted. Shadows moved. And slowly, very slowly, the shape of a massive four-engine aircraft emerged. It looked wounded. Its landing gear shook. One of the props ticked like metal tapping bone. But it was still majestic. Long, thin wings, a stretched fuselage, a shark-like nose. Eddie whispered, "Holy hell, that's a Condor." Tom felt his stomach drop. He had heard stories about the Condor. Everyone had. Sailors called it the scourge of the Atlantic. A plane that spotted convoys from hundreds of miles away and guided U-boats straight to them. But seeing one up close, that was different. As the aircraft rolled to stop, British command officers rushed forward, escorting the American team closer. Cameras clicked. Intelligence notebooks flipped open. A senior British officer, his voice rough from exhaustion, announced, "Gentlemen, what you're looking at is one of the only intact Fw-200 Condors we have ever captured, and you are going to take it apart." Tom felt a chill, part excitement, part fear, because this wasn't just any German aircraft. This was a monster with wings, a machine that changed the war in the Atlantic. As the engines shut down, the air turned quiet. Too quiet. The Americans climbed the stairs into the fuselage, and immediately something felt wrong. The inside didn't look like any bomber or a transport plane they knew. The flooring was thin, far too thin. The walls rattled with every movement. Everything seemed fragile, almost homemade. Eddie knocked on a support beam. It rang like cheap tin. "What the? This thing's built like a toy." Tom frowned. "A toy that flies across the whole damn ocean." They kept moving deeper inside. The cockpit was cramped, narrow, filled with gauges labeled in German script. But what stood out most were strange extra fuel pumps, long pipes running through the floor, and odd control levers unlike anything the Americans had ever seen. "What is all this?" one engineer muttered. No one answered, because halfway down the fuselage, they found something truly bizarre. Extra fuel tanks. Not just one, not two, six. 6 long-range tanks welded into places that clearly were never designed for them. One blocked part of the walkway. Another was strapped down with steel cables. A third had handwritten German notes carved into it, probably instructions from some field mechanic who had to improvise. Eddie's eyes widened. "They shove fuel tanks anywhere they could fit, Em." A British officer nodded. "That's how they're crossing the ocean. Then they dump the tanks in flight." Tom felt goosebumps crawl up his arms. Dumping tanks midair? Flying overloaded? Running an aircraft far beyond what the designers intended? It sounded insane. But it worked. Then they reached the belly of the plane, and that was when the mood changed. Fuel stains. Metal plates cut open and re-welded. Wooden braces jammed in to keep panels from rattling apart. Tom crouched down and pressed his palm against one of the beams. It flexed. "This isn't engineering," he whispered. "This is desperation." Everyone fell silent. For the first time, the Americans understood the truth. The Condor wasn't a perfect machine. It was a fragile airliner turned into a warplane, a bird that shouldn't still be flying. But the Germans forced it into the sky anyway. They pushed it to its limit. And the aircraft, light, weak, but stretched to its absolute breaking point, managed to fly thousands of miles and sink Allied ships across the Atlantic. That realization hit the mechanics hard. The Condor wasn't dangerous because it was strong. It was dangerous because it was reckless. And reckless machines create unpredictable enemies. Tom stood back up, dusting his hands off. "We need to look at the wing structure," he said. "I want to know how this thing even survived a storm." The British officer smirked slightly. "That is exactly why we brought you here." The Americans gathered their tools. The suspense was just beginning, because the next part of the investigation, the wings, would reveal something even stranger, something none of them expected, something that hinted the Condor's true power wasn't the engines, or even the fuel tanks, but in a single hidden feature that could change how the Allies fought the air war over the Atlantic. Fade out. Dramatic music rises. The wind picked up again as the American mechanics gathered around the giant wings of the Condor. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the full size of the aircraft now bathed in pale morning light. And up close, the wings looked nothing like what they expected. Tom Bradley stood with a wrench in hand, staring at the long, thin stretch of aluminum. "It's too skinny," he whispered. "Wings this thin shouldn't hold a plane this big." Eddie Harper walked beside him, dragging a wooden crate filled with tools. "Maybe that's why half of them crash landing," he joked nervously. But no one laughed. A British intelligence officer approached, carrying a folder stuffed with documents. His tone was serious, exhausted, like a man who hadn't slept since the Blitz. "You're not wrong," he said. "Condors break up in midair more often than we shoot them down. But when they don't break, they find our convoys." He opened the folder, showing photographs of destroyed merchant ships, burning oil slicks, broken hulls, lifeboats drifting. Every man standing there fell silent. This wasn't just a technical study. It was a race to save lives. Tom breathed in slowly, steadying himself. "Let's take a look inside these wings." The mechanics removed the first inspection panel, a metal plate the size of a small suitcase. It came off with a metallic groan, and the moment they looked inside, someone muttered under his breath, "What in God's name?" The interior wasn't clean. It wasn't logical. It wasn't German precision. It was a mess. Wires ran everywhere, some tied down, others hanging loose like roots of tree. Wooden blocks were wedged between metal ribs to keep the structure from flexing too much. Scratched German notes covered the inside walls. And deep inside, barely visible in the dim light, were pipes, dozens of long pipes, feeding fuel to different parts of the wing. Eddie tapped one of the pipes. "Fuel lines? All the way out here." A British officer nodded grimly. This was one of the surprises. The Germans extended fuel delivery right to the tips of the wings. He pointed at a sketch. A design that lets them run multiple tanks at once without flooding the engines. Tom blinked. "That's risky as hell." "It is," the officer replied. "But for long range, it works." Another mechanic, a quiet man named Lewis, stuck his head inside the wing and spoke in a low, uneasy voice. This thing wasn't built, it was force. That line hung in the air. They all stood there, realizing the same thing. The Condor wasn't some miracle aircraft. It was held together by ambition, shortcuts, and desperation. But then something else caught Tom's eye. Near the rear of the wing root, a strange compartment was built into the structure. Small, reinforced, and unlike anything else on the aircraft. "What's that?" Tom asked. The officers exchanged nervous glances. "Open it," the British officer said quietly. Tom and Eddie unscrewed the panel. It was heavier than expected. When it finally came loose, Tom felt the breath leave his lungs. Inside the compartment was a long-range radio system unlike anything they had seen. Not just a radio, a full maritime communications suite. Huge coils, thick wiring, extra amplifiers. a power system separate from the aircraft's main electrical grid. Eddie staggered back. This isn't just a scout plane. It's a damn ocean command post. The officer nodded. You're beginning to see why the Condor is so dangerous. It doesn't just spot convoys. It guides U-boats in real time. Tom stared at the device. He imagined the icy Atlantic waters, submarines running silent beneath the waves, waiting for a call from the sky. Can this thing really reach U-boats that far out? Tom asked softly. The answer came without hesitation. Yes, and not just reach them, coordinate them. For a moment, no one spoke. The idea that this fragile-looking aircraft held such enormous power made the mechanics uneasy. It wasn't built strong. It wasn't built safe. But it was built to change the war. Lewis swallowed hard. So the Condor is basically the eyes and the brain of the U-boat fleet. The British officer nodded. And now you know why Germany protected these aircraft like gold. Tom walked back toward the wing, running his hand along its thin surface. How many miles can it go with all these extra tanks? He asked. The officer replied, Over 2,000 miles, sometimes more when flown light. He paused. But that came at a price. He unfolded a photograph. A condor broken in half on a beach, its wings twisted like paper. This is what happens when the wings flex too much. They snap. Eddie stared at the photo. Then how did the good one survive? The answer came from Lewis, the quiet mechanic. They don't use strength, they use balance. The British officer nodded. Exactly. Every extra fuel tank, every radio, every piece of gear is part of a delicate balance. One mistake, one shift in weight, one gust of wind. He snapped his fingers. Gone. Tom exhaled slowly. So the Germans are risking their own men every time they send this thing up. They are, the officer confirmed. But they do it because the Condor is the only plane they have that can reach deep Atlantic convoys. Without it, the U-boats are blind. A moment of somber realization passed through the group. This machine, this fragile, patched-together aircraft, had shaped the Battle of the Atlantic, all because it could fly farther than anything else in the sky. But then came the discovery that changed everything. Lewis had climbed deeper into the wing structure. He tapped on a strange metal section that didn't match the rest of the wing. Tom, you might want to see this. Tom crawled in beside him, shining a flashlight. The metal panel wasn't aluminum. It was steel, reinforced steel. What the hell would they need steel for here? Tom asked. Lewis gently pushed the panel aside, and behind it, hidden deep in the wing, was a small compartment containing what looked like a navigation system far more advanced than anything the Allies had seen this early in the war. Multiple gyros, early autopilot components, and a device that looked like it could track position even when visibility was almost zero. Tom's heart began to pound. This is how they navigate the ocean. In clouds. At night. In storms. Eddie let out a slow whistle. So they weren't lucky. They weren't guessing. The British officer finished the sentence for him. They always knew exactly where they were. Tom felt a shiver. Not from the cold, but from the realization that the Condor wasn't just a scout plane with long range. It was a precision long-range hunter built from pieces that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. And if this hidden system was working perfectly, then maybe the Condor's real strength wasn't how far it could fly, but how it never got lost. The officer clapped his hands once. We continue inside the navigation bay next. That's where the biggest secrets are. Tom nodded, gathering his tools again. He didn't know it yet, but what they would find next would change Allied strategy forever. The fog rolled back in. Engines hummed in the distance, and the story was far from over. The air inside the Condor's front fuselage felt colder than outside. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the weight of everything they had just discovered. Either way, the American mechanics moved slowly now, almost cautiously, as if the aircraft itself was watching them. Tom Bradley wiped dust from his hands and stared into the narrow passage leading toward the navigation bay. This is it, he whispered. The heart of the whole thing. Eddie Harper followed behind him, flashlight beam trembling slightly. Feels like stepping into a submarine, he muttered. The walls grew tighter the further they went. Strange cables ran overhead. German labels covered the panels. It smelled like oil, metal, and something else, something old. A smell Tom couldn't quite place. Lewis brought up the rear, carrying a notebook stuffed with sketches they had made so far. "I've never seen an airplane built like this," he said softly. "Not even the patched-up ones back home." Just outside Navigation Bay, a British officer waited, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "This is where we lost our sleep," he said. "You boys are about to see why the Admiralty demanded this aircraft be studied immediately." Tom nodded, and they stepped inside. The Navigation Bay was smaller than expected, cramped, dim, and crowded with equipment. But what stunned them wasn't the size of the room. It was what was inside it, a massive, heavy-looking celestial navigation computer, like the ones used on large ships, was bolted into place. Next to it sat German-made gyro compasses, each one rugged, compact, and shock-mounted for stability. There were drift meters, high-frequency radios, and something Tom had only heard rumors about. A secret German course-holding device, an early form of automatic flight correction. Primitive but effective, an early autopilot. Eddie's jaw dropped. "You're telling me this flying tin can have autopilot?" Lewis let out a low whistle. "No wonder they can fly in bad weather. No wonder they can cross the ocean without help." The British officer tapped one of the instruments lightly. "It doesn't just help them fly straight," he explained. "This system lets them keep steady for hours, save fuel, reduce pilot fatigue. That's how they get their range." Tom felt a chill run through him. The Germans didn't build a strong aircraft. They built a smart one. He leaned over the central navigation table, a thick wooden slab with fold-out arms and metal rails for charts. A map was still clipped to the surface. A German convoy route. Pencil lines marked long arcs across the ocean. Notes scribbled in neat handwriting showed wind drift, expected cloud layers, and possible U-boat refueling points. The handwriting itself shook Tom more than he expected, not because it was German, but because it belonged to a person, a human being doing their job, planning carefully, determined to win. War wasn't machinery. It was people. People fighting, adjusting, improvising, surviving. He felt that more now than ever. Eddie stepped closer to the navigation desk and picked up a small, worn notebook. He flipped it open. "What's this?" The pages were filled with navigation calculations, but tucked in the back was a photo. A German crew standing in front of the Condor, smiling, confident, proud. Tom stared at it for a long moment. Lewis broke the silence first. "They're just men," he said quietly. "Same as us." No one replied. They didn't need to. War makes enemies out of people who might have been friends in another lifetime. Tom gently set the photo back and closed the notebook. "All right," he said. "What else is hiding in here?" They examined the radios, long-range sets with extra amplifiers, powerful enough to reach submarines hundreds of miles away. They examined the drift meters, designed for crossing oceans with almost no visual reference. They studied the antenna wiring, reinforced, extended, clearly modified for deep Atlantic operations. Then they found the final surprise. Behind a small metal hatch near the navigator's seat was a sealed box, heavy, locked, and secured with a thick latch. Eddie tugged on it. "What do you think this is?" The British officer crossed his arms. "We weren't able to open it without damaging the casing. But since you're mechanics, give it a try." Tom grabbed his tools. Within minutes, he loosened the bolts and pried the hatch open. The box slid out with metallic scrape. Lewis held the flashlight steady as they opened the lid. Inside was a direction-finding device, compact but advanced. A system capable of detecting radio transmissions from ships far beyond the visible horizon. A system that could pinpoint convoys even in total darkness. Eddie exhaled harshly. So they weren't searching blindly. They were tracking. The British officer nodded. "Exactly. The Condor wasn't just a scout plane. It was a hunter, a long-range predator." Tom closed the box gently. They had now seen everything. The hidden fuel systems, the fragile but balanced wings, the advanced navigation, the submarine communication suite, and now a direction finder capable of turning the Atlantic into a giant hunting ground. No wonder sailors feared the Condor. No wonder the Admiralty wanted answers. As the team stepped back outside the aircraft, the wind gusted across the runway, blowing cold air over the fog. The Condor loomed behind them, a massive, wounded giant resting on unstable legs. Tom looked at it with new understanding. "It's not a miracle machine," he said slowly. "It's a collection of risky ideas held together by guts." He paused. "And those ideas almost turned the Atlantic into Germany's sea." Eddie nodded. "But now we know how to stop it." The British officers stepped beside them. "That's exactly the point. With what you've learned, we can adjust our convoy routes, improve our radar coverage, target the frequencies they use, and most importantly, we know where the Condor is strongest and where it's weak." Lewis looked back at the aircraft one last time. "It's strange," he said softly. "They used all this brilliance, all this hard work for something so destructive." Tom placed a hand on his shoulder. "War makes inventors out of everyone, but it's up to us to make sure we use what we learn to save lives." The fog began to thicken again. Mechanics rolled their tool carts away. Officers scribbled notes. And the Condor, silent now, seemed to fade back into the mist like a ghost from another world. Tom took a deep breath. "We're done here," he said. "But the war is just getting started." Fade to darkness. Low, solemn music builds. Thanks so much for watching this documentary. If you enjoyed the storytelling and want more deep dive WW2 stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment below. Tell me which moment surprised you the most. And as always, thank you for watching. More incredible history episodes are on the way.